The morning sun had barely peeked through the windows of Atlanta General Hospital when Dr. Maya Thomas finally stepped out of the operating room. Her shoulders felt heavy after performing a complex heart surgery on a 60-year-old patient. The dark circles under her eyes told the story of the past 12 hours, but a small smile played on her lips. The surgery had been successful. She glanced at her watch, her heart racing a little. Her flight to Chicago was in 2 hours, where she was scheduled to present her groundbreaking research at a medical conference. There was no time to go home and freshen up. Still wearing her professional attire, a crisp navy blazer over a white blouse and tailored pants, she grabbed her carry-on from her office and headed straight to the airport. The terminal was buzzing with its usual morning chaos. Business travelers clutched their coffee cups like lifelines, families wrangled excited children, and the constant hum of rolling suitcases filled the air. Maya joined the boarding line, her mind already rehearsing the presentation she would deliver tomorrow. As she made her way down the narrow airplane aisle, Maya could feel the weight of her overnight shift in every step. Her carry-on seemed to have doubled in weight, packed with medical journals and her laptop. The overhead bins loomed above, seemingly higher than usual. She looked around, catching the eye of a flight attendant who was helping an elderly gentleman store his much lighter bag. "Excuse me," Maya called out softly, trying to lift her bag while balancing her medical files. The flight attendant glanced her way, but quickly turned to assist another passenger with a small purse. Maya stood there, arms starting to shake from holding the heavy bag, as 3 more crew members walked past her without a second look. A young man sitting nearby watched the scene unfold, but kept his eyes fixed on his phone. The businesswoman in front of Maya had received immediate assistance just moments ago. The contrast wasn't lost on Maya. 20 years of breaking barriers in medicine had taught her to recognize these subtle moments. Finally, a kind passenger from 2 rows behind offered to help. As Maya settled into her seat, she pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she considered how to document what had just happened. She wasn't angry. She was too tired for anger. Instead, she felt a familiar determination rising within her, the same feeling that had driven her to become one of the top pediatric surgeons in the country. The pre-flight announcements began, and Maya looked around the cabin, observing the interactions between crew and passengers. She noticed how smiles were distributed, how questions were answered, how assistance was offered. Her trained eye for detail, the same one that had saved countless lives in the operating room, now captured each interaction with careful precision. As the plane began to taxi, Maya thought about her young patient from this morning. She had promised that little girl's parents that their daughter would have a better future. Perhaps this moment, too, was about creating a better future, not just for herself, but for everyone who would board this flight after her. She straightened her posture and took a deep breath. The next few hours would require the same patience and precision she brought to her operating room. Sometimes, she reminded herself, the most powerful changes start with a simple documentation of truth. The plane had been in the air for about 30 minutes when Maya noticed something that made her stomach tighten. A passenger 3 rows ahead, a blonde woman in a business suit, raised her hand to get attention. Almost instantly, 2 flight attendants rushed to help her find extra space for her laptop bag. Maya watched this scene unfold while absently rubbing her wrist, still sore from holding up her heavy carry-on earlier. She took another sip of her water, trying to push away the fatigue from her overnight shift. The contrast in treatment wasn't subtle anymore. It was like watching 2 different movies playing on the same screen. As she observed more interactions, Maya pulled out her phone again, her doctor's habit of keeping detailed notes kicking in. She watched as an elderly Asian man's request for a blanket was met with a delayed response and a curt, "We'll see if we have any left." Just minutes later, the same flight attendant cheerfully offered a blanket to another passenger without being asked. The pattern was becoming clearer with each passing minute. Maya felt her chest tightening, not from anger, but from a deep, familiar ache. It was the same feeling she'd experienced during medical school when professors would automatically direct their answers to her white classmates, even when she was the one asking the question. A young mother struggling with a crying baby caught Maya's attention. The woman, wearing a hijab, was trying to warm a bottle while other passengers shot irritated glances her way. Maya noticed how the flight attendants walked past quickly, pretending not to notice the mother's obvious need for help. Without hesitation, Maya pressed her call button. "Could we get some warm water for that baby's bottle?" Maya asked when the attendant finally came. Her voice was firm but kind, the same tone she used when teaching new residents at the hospital. The flight attendant hesitated, then nodded and walked away. Maya made another note on her phone. The mother gave Maya a grateful look when she finally received the warm water. As the baby's cries settled into content coos, Maya thought about her own mother, who had taught her to stand up not just for herself, but for others. Sometimes, her mother used to say, being strong means helping others find their strength too. Maya clicked on her phone's camera and subtly began recording timestamps and brief descriptions of what she was witnessing. She noted how requests from certain passengers were met with smiles and immediate assistance, while others faced delays, excuses, or outright ignorance. Her medical training had taught her the importance of documentation. Evidence over emotion, facts over feelings. A flight attendant walked by, offering refreshments. Maya noticed how she skipped several rows of passengers, including hers, before resuming service a few rows ahead. It wasn't random. There was a clear pattern to who was being overlooked. The realization sent a chill down her spine, despite the cabin's warm air. As she documented each incident, Maya began formulating a plan. Her years of handling difficult situations in the hospital had taught her that the most effective response isn't always the most dramatic one. Change, real lasting change, requires strategy, evidence, and most importantly, the courage to speak up in a way that others can hear. She glanced at her presentation notes for tomorrow's medical conference. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, a doctor who had spent her career breaking barriers in medicine, facing the same kind of barriers at 35,000 feet. But maybe, just maybe, this flight would become more than just another story of discrimination. Maybe it could become a moment of transformation. Maya straightened her back and checked the flight time remaining. There were still 2 hours before landing in Chicago. 2 hours to gather evidence, 2 hours to prepare her approach, 2 hours to turn this experience into something meaningful. Her fingers moved swiftly across her phone screen, documenting each interaction with the precision of a surgeon. This wasn't just about one flight anymore. It was about making sure the next generation wouldn't have to face the same invisible barriers. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she reviewed the notes she'd been taking throughout the flight. Each entry told a story, building a pattern that was impossible to ignore. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the countless times in her career when she'd had to decide whether to speak up or stay quiet. The memory of her first day as chief surgeon flooded back. She had walked into the operating room, and a nurse had assumed she was there to clean up. Even after explaining she was the surgeon, some staff members kept directing their questions to her assistant instead of her. That day, she had chosen to let her work speak for itself. By the end of the surgery, she had earned their respect through her skills and composure. But this situation felt different. As a doctor, Maya had taken an oath to help others, and right now, she wasn't just witnessing poor service. She was watching people's dignity being quietly chipped away. She looked at the young mother with the baby, now sleeping peacefully, and thought about what message staying silent would send. Opening her phone's notes again, Maya began organizing her observations more systematically. Her medical training kicked in. Just like diagnosing a patient, she needed to present clear, undeniable evidence. She noted times, seat numbers, specific interactions, and the stark differences in how requests were handled. Some passengers received warm smiles and prompt service, while others were met with cold shoulders and delayed responses. A slight bump of turbulence shook the plane, and Maya watched as flight attendants rushed to check on certain passengers while completely ignoring others who looked equally concerned. She added this to her notes, her doctor's handwriting surprisingly steady despite her growing unease. As she documented each incident, Maya thought about her presentation tomorrow. She was supposed to talk about breaking barriers in pediatric surgery, about making healthcare more equitable. How could she stand in front of hundreds of medical professionals talking about equality if she couldn't even stand up for it on this flight? The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders, heavier than any medical bag she'd ever carried. She thought about her younger sister, who was just starting medical school, and all the other young people who would come after her. Sometimes being a pioneer meant more than just being the first to achieve something. It meant making sure you weren't the last. Maya pulled out her conference notes, flipping to a blank page. She began drafting what she would say to the lead flight attendant. Her approach needed to be just right. Firm, but not aggressive, educational rather than accusatory. Just as she did in the operating room when teaching new surgeons, she needed to help others see the problem and become part of the solution. Her thoughts were interrupted by a gentle tap on her shoulder. The elderly man sitting next to her, who had been quietly observing throughout the flight, spoke in a low voice. "I've been watching too," he said, "and I want you to know that whatever you decide to do, you have my support." His words nearly brought tears to her eyes. It was a reminder that she wasn't alone in seeing what was happening. Maya took a deep breath and reviewed her notes one final time. Each documented incident was like a piece of a larger puzzle, revealing a picture that needed to be addressed. She thought about all the passengers who had faced similar treatment on other flights, but hadn't been in a position to speak up. As a doctor, she was used to advocating for patients who couldn't speak for themselves. Maybe that's what this moment was calling for. Someone to speak up not just for themselves, but for everyone who had ever felt invisible at 35,000 feet. Looking at her watch, Maya realized they still had an hour before landing in Chicago. An hour to find the courage to transform this experience into something meaningful. An hour to prepare herself to handle this situation with the same precision and care she brought to her surgeries. She straightened her blazer and began rehearsing her words, knowing that what she was about to do wasn't just about one flight. It was about changing the way people saw and treated each other. With just 45 minutes left in the flight, Maya gently pressed the call button. Her heart was beating faster, but her hands were steady, the same steadiness she relied on in the operating room. As she waited, she glanced at her phone where she had recorded every interaction, every missed service, every overlooked request. The flight attendant who approached had been one of those she'd observed throughout the flight. "Could I please speak with the lead flight attendant?" Maya asked politely, her voice calm but firm. The attendant hesitated for a moment before nodding and walking away. A few minutes later, a different flight attendant with a senior crew badge approached Maya's seat. "I'm the lead on this flight. How can I help you?" she asked, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. Maya gestured to the empty seat beside her, which the elderly man had kindly offered to vacate for a few minutes. "I'd like to have a conversation about something I've noticed during our flight," Maya began, keeping her voice low to avoid drawing attention. "Would you mind if I record our conversation? I think it's important for both of us." The lead attendant seemed taken aback, but nodded slowly. Maya placed her phone on her tray table, recording app open, and began sharing her observations. She pulled out her carefully organized notes, starting with specific examples. At 10:15 a.m., 3 passengers requested water. 2 received immediate service, while 1 waited 17 minutes. Maya said, her doctor's precision evident in her documentation. At 10:45 a.m., 4 passengers asked for blankets. 3 received them within 2 minutes. The 4th is still waiting. The lead attendant's professional demeanor began to crack slightly. "We treat all passengers equally," she said defensively. "Sometimes service delays happen due to timing and availability." Maya nodded thoughtfully. I understand that delays can happen, she replied. But I've noticed a pattern. She continued sharing her observations, now pointing out how certain rows consistently received prompt, friendly service, while others were repeatedly overlooked or treated with noticeably less warmth. I'm a doctor, Maya explained, her voice softening. In medicine, we're trained to look for patterns because they often reveal underlying issues. What I've seen today isn't about individual delays or oversights. It's about a systematic difference in how passengers are treated. The conversation paused as the lead attendant processed this information. Around them, other passengers had begun to listen discreetly. The mother with the baby caught Maya's eye and gave a small, encouraging nod. Let me share something from my own field, Maya continued. In hospitals, we sometimes find that certain patients receive different levels of care. Not because any medical professional intends to discriminate, but because of unconscious biases we all carry. The first step to addressing this is acknowledging it exists. The lead attendant's expression changed slightly, a crack in the defensive wall. We undergo regular training, she began, but her voice trailed off as Maya showed her the clear timeline of events from the flight. I'm not here to place blame, Maya assured her. I'm here because I believe we can do better. In medicine, when we identify a problem, we see it as an opportunity to improve patient care. Perhaps this could be an opportunity to improve passenger care. The plane hit a small pocket of turbulence, causing a brief pause in their conversation. When it steadied, Maya noticed more passengers were watching their interaction. She kept her voice steady and professional, the same way she would while teaching medical students. What if we work together to address this? Maya suggested, reaching into her bag and pulling out one of her hospital's training documents on unconscious bias in healthcare. The principles we use in medicine could be adapted for aviation. It's about making everyone feel seen, respected, and valued. The lead attendant picked up the document, her professional mask softening into genuine interest. Other crew members had begun to gather nearby, listening to the conversation while pretending to busy themselves with routine tasks. As Maya continued sharing her observations and suggestions, she could feel the atmosphere around them changing. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was becoming a moment of understanding, a chance for real change at 35,000 feet. The lead flight attendant shifted in her seat, her fingers nervously adjusting her name badge. I appreciate your detailed observations, she began, her voice carrying a defensive edge, but we're trained professionals. We provide the same level of service to everyone. Maya pulled up a specific time-stamped entry from her notes. 20 minutes ago, a passenger in 14C requested coffee. They received it within 1 minute. 3 minutes later, the passenger in 15A made the same request. They're still waiting. She paused, letting the information sink in. Would you like to see more examples? Around them, the atmosphere in the cabin had changed. Passengers who had been pretending to sleep or read were now listening intently. The mother with the baby, who had struggled to get help earlier, was watching with quiet hope in her eyes. Look, the lead attendant said, lowering her voice, I understand your concern, but you have to realize how busy we are during flights. Sometimes things just happen in a certain order. Maya leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm. I work in emergency rooms. I know all about being busy and handling multiple urgent requests. But being busy doesn't explain why some passengers consistently receive the immediate attention while others are repeatedly overlooked. A younger flight attendant hovering nearby suddenly spoke up. I've noticed it too, she admitted quietly, quickly looking down when her supervisor turned to her. Sometimes I catch myself making assumptions about who might need more help or who might be more demanding. The lead attendant's professional facade cracked slightly at this unexpected confession. She glanced around the cabin, really looking at the passengers for perhaps the first time during the flight. The evidence was right there, the subtle divisions in service that had become so routine they were almost invisible to those providing it. Maya reached into her bag and pulled out her hospital ID. At my hospital, we discovered similar patterns in how different patients were treated. It wasn't intentional. That's what made it so hard to see. But once we acknowledged it, we could address it. The plane hit another patch of turbulence, and Maya watched as the crew automatically rushed to check on certain passengers while barely glancing at others. The lead attendant noticed it too, and something in her expression shifted. "What did your hospital do?" she asked, her defensive tone giving way to genuine curiosity. "How did you address it?" Maya pulled out her laptop, opening a presentation she'd given at medical conferences. We started with awareness. Then we implemented simple changes, like rotating which rooms we checked first, making sure our attention wasn't following unconscious patterns. Other crew members had gathered closer, maintaining the appearance of routine work while listening intently. The younger attendant who had spoken up earlier was now openly taking notes on her phone. A businessman who had received prompt service throughout the flight cleared his throat. "I've been watching too," he admitted. "I get better service than my colleagues on almost every flight, and I never understood why until now." The lead attendant looked at her crew, then back at Maya. "But what can we really do about it? We can't change the whole airline industry." Maya smiled warmly. Change starts with one person, one flight, one moment of awareness. In medicine, we say that recognizing a symptom is the first step to treating it. Maybe this conversation is our first step. The tension in the air began to shift into something different, not quite acceptance yet, but openness to possibility. The lead attendant looked at her watch, then at her crew, then back at Maya. "We have 30 minutes before landing," she said slowly. Could you tell us more about what you've observed? And maybe share some of those hospital strategies." Around them, passengers who had been pretending not to listen began to nod in agreement. The elderly man who had supported Maya earlier smiled encouragingly. The young mother adjusted her sleeping baby and leaned forward to listen. Maya's heart lifted. This wasn't just defensive denial anymore. It was the beginning of understanding. And sometimes, understanding was the most powerful catalyst for change. The next 15 minutes transformed the aircraft into something unexpected. A classroom at 35,000 feet. Maya opened her laptop wider, showing the lead attendant and her crew the training materials she used at her hospital. The PowerPoint slides cast a soft glow on their attentive faces. In medicine, we started with something simple. Maya explained, her voice carrying the same warmth she used with her medical students. We created a checklist system, not just for procedures, but for how we interact with patients. It helped us catch our own biases before they affected care. The young flight attendant who had spoken up earlier raised her hand slightly. "Could we do something like that? Maybe a service checklist for each row, regardless of who's sitting there?" Maya nodded encouragingly. "Exactly." In the ER, we started marking the time of every patient interaction. It made patterns visible that we hadn't noticed before. She gestured to her careful notes from the flight. "Just like I did here today." The lead attendant, who had been quietly absorbing everything, suddenly straightened up. "We could adapt our service cards," she said, pulling out the small notebook they used to track drink orders. "Instead of just marking what passengers want, we could note when they asked and when they received it." A flight attendant with gray streaks in her hair spoke up from the back. "I've been flying for 20 years, she said softly. "Sometimes we fall into patterns without realizing it. Maybe it's time we looked at those patterns more closely." Maya pulled up another slide showing how her hospital had improved patient satisfaction scores after implementing these changes. The best part is, these small changes had big results. When everyone feels valued, everything works better. The mother with the baby, who had been listening intently, shifted in her seat. "Could passengers help too?" she asked. "Maybe give feedback in a way that helps identify these patterns." The lead attendant's eyes lit up. "We already have customer surveys, but they're very general." What if we added specific questions about service timing and consistency? As they talked, Maya noticed something remarkable happening in the cabin. Passengers from different rows were turning to each other, sharing their own experiences openly but respectfully. The invisible barriers that had divided the cabin earlier seemed to be dissolving. In the hospital, Maya continued, pulling out her conference notes. We found that talking openly about bias actually made everyone more comfortable. Instead of feeling accused, people felt empowered to make positive changes. The businessman who had benefited from preferential treatment earlier raised his hand. Could you share these materials with the airline's corporate office? This feels important beyond just one flight. The lead attendant nodded thoughtfully. We have a crew meeting next week with regional managers. This could be something worth presenting. She turned to Maya. Would you be willing to share your hospital's training framework? We could adapt it for aviation. Maya felt a warm surge of hope. This was exactly what she had dreamed of, not just pointing out problems, but working together to find solutions. She opened her email on her laptop. I can send you our basic training outline right now. Your team can modify it to fit your needs. The plane began its initial descent into Chicago, the seatbelt sign chiming softly. As passengers returned to their seats, there was a different energy in the cabin. People were smiling at each other, acknowledging one another in ways they hadn't before. The lead attendant stood up, straightening her uniform. Thank you, she said to Maya, her voice sincere. Sometimes it takes someone from outside to help us see what's right in front of us. She paused, then added, would you be willing to stay in touch? Help us develop this training program? Maya smiled, thinking about all the future passengers who might benefit from this moment. Of course, she said, pulling out one of her business cards. Change happens one conversation at a time. This is just the beginning. The elderly man who had supported her earlier caught her eye and gave her a gentle nod. Sometimes, Maya realized, the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of courage, like speaking up on a routine flight to Chicago. The plane had been on the ground in Chicago for barely an hour when the first video appeared online. A passenger sitting 2 rows behind Maya had captured the entire conversation on their phone. The clip showed Maya's calm, professional approach, the flight crew's gradual shift from defensiveness to understanding, and the remarkable transformation that happened in the cabin. Had to share this amazing moment, read the caption. Watch how this doctor turned a bad situation into a teaching opportunity at 35,000 feet. By the time Maya finished checking into her hotel, the video had already gained thousands of views. The comments section was filling up with similar stories from travelers around the world, each sharing their own experiences with unequal treatment during flights. I never knew how to bring this up, one comment read. She handled it so perfectly, firm but kind. This is how real change happens. Maya was preparing for her medical conference presentation when her phone started buzzing with notifications. News outlets were picking up the story. The airline's social media team had already responded to the viral video with a public statement. We are aware of the incident on Flight 2317 and are grateful to the passenger who brought this to our attention. We are committed to addressing these concerns and implementing immediate changes to our training procedures. In her hotel room, Maya watched as her inbox filled with messages. Other medical professionals shared stories of how they'd faced similar situations. Flight attendants from different airlines reached out, thanking her for addressing the issue in a way that opened doors rather than pointing fingers. A local news reporter caught up with Maya outside the conference center. What made you decide to speak up? She asked, holding out her microphone. Maya adjusted her conference badge, thinking carefully before responding. In medicine, we learned that healing can't happen until we acknowledge there's a problem. This wasn't about calling anyone out. It was about helping everyone see what was happening, so we could fix it together. The young flight attendant who had supported Maya's observations posted her own video response. Working in aviation, we sometimes fall into routines without realizing their impact. Today changed how I'll approach my job forever. One passenger showed us how to be better, and I'm grateful. Inside the conference, Maya's phone kept lighting up with notifications. The airline's corporate office had released an official statement announcing a comprehensive review of their service practices and the development of new training protocols. They specifically mentioned the doctor whose approach would help shape their future training. During her lunch break, Maya noticed another viral post, this time from the mother with the baby on the flight. "Today I watched someone stand up for all of us," she wrote. But what touched me most was how she did it, with grace, understanding, and a real desire to make things better for everyone. Other videos from the flight began surfacing, each showing different angles of the conversation. Social media users praised the way Maya used her medical background to bridge the gap between problem and solution. "This is what leadership looks like," one viral tweet declared. The airline's CEO released a video statement that afternoon. "We are reaching out to work with this passenger to help us develop better training programs. Her medical expertise in addressing unconscious bias will be invaluable in improving our service for all passengers." By evening, the story had evolved into something bigger than one flight. People were sharing similar videos from other situations, in restaurants, stores, and offices, where someone had addressed discrimination with the same careful, constructive approach Maya had used. The elderly passenger who had supported Maya posted his own perspective. "I've flown millions of miles over my lifetime. Today was the first time I saw someone address this issue in a way that actually brought people together instead of pulling them apart." As Maya prepared for bed that night, exhausted but hopeful, she noticed the view count on the original video had passed 1 million. But it wasn't the numbers that moved her. It was the conversations happening in the comments, the way people were sharing their own stories and discussing solutions. Her phone buzzed one last time. A message from the lead flight attendant. "Thank you for showing us a better way forward. Sometimes the hardest problems need the gentlest approach." 3 weeks after the flight, Maya found herself in a very different kind of conference room. Instead of discussing medical procedures, she was sitting at a long table with airline executives, training specialists, and flight crew representatives from across the country. "The video of your approach has become required viewing in our training sessions," the airline's head of customer service explained, spreading out papers across the table. "We've seen a 40% increase in crew members voluntarily reporting their own bias incidents. They're not afraid to speak up anymore." Maya looked around the room at the eager faces. The lead flight attendant from her Chicago flight was there too, now wearing a new badge that identified her as part of the airline's newly formed Service Equality team. "Our customer feedback has already started changing," another executive shared, pulling up a presentation on the screen. "Passengers are noticing more consistent service. But more importantly, our crew members say they feel more aware and better equipped to provide fair service." The young flight attendant who had first spoken up on the flight was now leading workshops for new crew members. "We use Dr. Maya's checklist system," she explained, holding up a modified version of the airline's service cards. "Every interaction is timed and tracked. No more unconscious patterns." During a coffee break, Maya overheard 2 pilots discussing how the changes had affected the entire aviation industry. Other airlines had started implementing similar training programs, not wanting to fall behind in addressing these important issues. The most powerful change, the lead flight attendant shared during her presentation, is how we talk about these issues now. It's not about blame or shame. It's about awareness and improvement, just like Dr. Maya showed us. The mother with the baby from the flight had been invited to share her perspective with the group. "Last week, I took another flight," she told them. "The difference was incredible. Every passenger was treated with the same respect and attention. That's what real change looks like." Maya opened her laptop and showed them the latest data from her hospital's bias training program. "In medicine, we found that addressing these issues actually improved overall patient care. Everyone benefits when we treat everyone fairly." The airline's training director stood up, excited to share some numbers. Complaints about discriminatory service have dropped by 60% since we implemented these changes. But here's what's really interesting. Overall customer satisfaction scores have improved for all passengers. During lunch, Maya sat with a group of flight attendants who shared their own stories of transformation. Now when I walked down the aisle, one said, "I consciously think about each passenger as an individual, not as part of a pattern." The elderly passenger from her flight had been invited to join a passenger advisory board. "We're helping the airlines see things from every perspective," he explained. "Real change needs everyone's voice to be heard." Maya watched as crew members role-played different scenarios, using the techniques she had demonstrated on that flight. They were learning to recognize their own biases and correct them in real time, just like she had taught her medical students to do. The airline's CEO made a surprise appearance in the afternoon. "What started on one flight has transformed our entire company culture," she announced. "We're not just training people to provide better service, we're helping them become better humans." As the day wound down, Maya received an unexpected update. Other industries had started reaching out to the airline, wanting to learn about their new training program. Hotels, restaurants, and retail chains were all interested in adapting the approach. The lead flight attendant caught up with Maya as she was leaving. "Remember when you said change happens one conversation at a time?" she asked, smiling. "Well, that one conversation on our flight has started thousands of others." Maya packed up her materials, thinking about her neck surgery scheduled for tomorrow morning. Sometimes the most powerful operations weren't the ones performed in an operating room. They were the ones that helped heal society's invisible wounds. 6 months after that memorable flight to Chicago, Maya sat in her office reading through a stack of letters. Each one told a story of change, not just in the skies, but across the country. The top letter caught her eye. It was from a flight attendant who had recently completed the new training program. "I never realized how my actions affected people until I went through your training," the letter read. "Yesterday, I caught myself about to skip over a passenger. But then I remembered your words about patterns, and I stopped myself. The smile I got in return made my whole day better." Maya glanced at the framed photo on her wall. A group picture from the airline's first graduation ceremony for their new equality training program. The lead flight attendant from her flight stood proudly in the center, now a full-time trainer for the airline staff. Her phone buzzed with a text message from the young mother she'd met on the flight. "Just flew again today," the message read. "The difference is amazing. Every passenger treated exactly the same. My baby and I felt so welcome. Thank you for speaking up that day." Opening her email, Maya found the latest report from the airline. Passenger complaints about unequal treatment had dropped by 85% since implementing the new training program. But more importantly, staff satisfaction had improved significantly. Flight attendants reported feeling more confident and comfortable in their roles. The elderly passenger who had supported her that day had become a regular speaker at airline training sessions, sharing his perspective from decades of flying. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of courage," he would tell new staff members. Maya pulled up a presentation on her laptop. She was scheduled to speak at a national transportation conference next week. Other airlines had adopted similar training programs, and now bus companies, train services, and cruise lines were following suit. What started as one conversation at 35,000 feet had grown into a movement. Her office phone rang. It was the airline's CEO. "The success of our program has caught the attention of other industries," she explained excitedly. "Hotels, restaurants, retail chains, they all want to know how we did it. Would you be willing to help adapt the training for them?" As Maya looked out her office window at the hospital grounds below, she thought about how this had all started, with a simple decision to speak up, to transform a negative experience into something positive. The medical conference she'd been heading to that day seemed so long ago now. A new batch of letters arrived on her desk. this time from passengers sharing their recent flying experiences. One stood out. "I've been flying for business for 20 years. For the first time, I see every passenger being treated with the same respect. You've changed not just how we fly, but how we see each other." The young flight attendant who had first supported Maya's observations had been promoted to head of crew training. Her latest video update showed flight attendants using the checklist system Maya had helped design, ensuring every passenger received the same high level of service. Maya's hospital had also benefited from the experience. They'd refined their own bias training program based on feedback from the airline's success. Other hospitals were now requesting the improved training materials, creating a ripple effect through the medical community. Opening her calendar, Maya smiled at the day's schedule. Between surgeries, she had a video call with a major hotel chain interested in implementing similar training. That evening, she was scheduled to mentor a group of young professionals learning to advocate for positive change in their own workplaces. The final letter in her stack was from a child who had been on a recent flight. The crayon drawing showed flight attendants helping everyone equally, with a big rainbow above the plane. Sometimes, Maya thought, the simplest perspectives showed the truest picture of progress. As she prepared for her first surgery of the day, Maya realized that real change wasn't just about fixing problems. It was about showing others how to be part of the solution. What had started as one difficult moment on a flight had grown into something far bigger than she could have imagined. And somewhere in the skies above, thousands of passengers were experiencing what real equality felt like, one flight at a time.